Seattle, Washington, 2014. Madison Hale had never been the kind of person who stood out. At 26, she lived a quiet life, working as a data analyst for a mid-sized tech company downtown. She commuted on the same bus each morning, wore the same neutral tones, and rarely spoke in meetings unless directly asked. Her precision and discretion made her reliable, if not particularly memorable. She still lived in her childhood home with her parents and older brother Trevor, not out of necessity but familiarity. Her room remained the same as in college, organized, color-coded, almost sterile. Trevor, in contrast, drew attention effortlessly. He was 31, a confident, well-spoken attorney with a sharp suit and an even sharper mind. He'd built a name for himself in the legal scene of King County, known for his charisma in courtrooms and fundraisers alike. Their parents adored him. Every family dinner was a highlight reel of his triumphs, from corporate deals to glowing mentions in local publications. Madison, accustomed to the background, nodded along, smiled politely, and washed the dishes. The rupture began on an ordinary Thursday evening. Madison came home from work, rain-soaked and tired, and opened her laptop to check on a database report she had promised to revise. Instead, she was locked out. Her passwords didn't work. Some folders were missing. Her desktop icons had been rearranged, as if someone else had used the device. She assumed a glitch, maybe an update gone wrong, but the unease lingered. 2 days later, the police knocked on the office door at her workplace. They had a warrant, polite but firm. She was escorted out in silence while her co-workers watched in frozen disbelief. At the station, they laid out the allegations: fraudulent transactions tied to her name, internal transfers routed through accounts she allegedly created, shell companies linked back to her corporate login. The evidence was overwhelming: digital footprints, time-stamped authorizations, IP addresses pointing to her devices. She sat in the interrogation room, numb, her heart thudding with disbelief. Her parents were devastated but confused. Trevor arrived at the station like a man stepping into a courtroom he already owned, calm, composed, the family's protector. He reviewed the documents, spoke privately with the detectives, and later pulled Madison aside. His tone was sympathetic, but edged with something she couldn't name. He offered help, but only if she cooperated. She needed to accept some responsibility, he said, plead mitigating circumstances. It would be easier for everyone that way. He promised to get her a deal, smooth the damage. She nodded, barely hearing him. Something was wrong. Not just the charges, but the way he moved, the way he avoided meeting her eyes. Deep inside, a part of her, the quiet, observant part that had always seen things others ignored, began to wake up. She had been framed. And Trevor, the golden child, the trusted brother, the perfect son, was hiding something. He hadn't come to save her. He had come to manage the fallout. The betrayal didn't come as a dramatic moment. It settled over her slowly, like a film of dust, suffocating and invisible. The sentencing was brief and clinical. Madison received a conditional conviction, a monetary fine, and a permanent mark on her record that barred her from ever working in government or any role requiring public trust. There was no trial, no deeper investigation, just a quiet exit through the back door of the courthouse while photographers waited outside, capturing the fall of a once promising analyst. Her employer terminated her contract within hours. Her access badges were revoked, her inbox erased, and her desk cleared out by a stranger. Emails from colleagues ceased. Texts went unanswered. The polite silences of former friends became walls. Her parents remained silent for days. Then came the quiet conversation in the living room, heavy with unspoken doubt. Trevor sat beside them, calm and reasonable, explaining how unfortunate the situation had become. They nodded along. He was always the rational one. They trusted him. Madison watched their loyalty shift like sunlight across a fading rug, slow and irreversible. She packed her things and left before the weekend ended. Portland felt like a different country. She rented a small apartment above a closed-down bookstore, the windows thin, the radiator clanging at night. She applied to every job that even remotely matched her experience: bookkeeping, finance assistance, freelance audits. Every time the background check ended it. No one wanted someone flagged for fraud, no matter how minor the sentence. The rejection emails blurred together into a single message: not welcome. Desperate, she took a temporary job at a local electronics repair shop. The pay was low, but it kept her afloat. There she met Grayson, a former IT engineer who had left the industry after a nervous breakdown and now quietly rebuilt vintage hardware and jailbroke old phones. He was cautious, private, and painfully observant. Over late nights in the back room, surrounded by cables and soldering fumes, Madison told him the story. Not all at once, but in pieces. Grayson didn't question her. Instead, he began helping. Together, they started from scratch. They retrieved her old backups, examined corrupted email headers, scraped metadata from cloud archives. Madison brought in her damaged laptop, and Grayson recovered fragments from the overwritten sectors. They looked at timestamps, IP logs, and session tokens. Slowly, the trail revealed itself. The emails used to authorize the transfers hadn't come from her router. The login location mismatched her known geography. Her digital signature had been copied, not generated. It had been imported. Bit by bit, the puzzle formed a portrait. Trevor had routed the access through a spoofed IP registered to a nearby co-working space. He had used administrator-level permissions to copy Madison's credentials, likely during a visit to her room when she wasn't home. The forgery was flawless. Subtle alterations in file names, delays in metadata timestamps, fragments of cache left behind like faded fingerprints. He had built the frame with patience, layering it until the lie became invisible to the naked eye. Madison stared at the compiled data for hours. It was no longer a theory. It was deliberate, calculated, cold. The betrayal wasn't a moment of panic or a misstep. It had been planned, executed, and buried, like a professional crime dressed in family clothing. Everything she'd lost hadn't been collateral. It had been the goal. Madison filed her appeal with a meticulous hand and cautious optimism. She assembled the documents, the recovered metadata, and the reconstructed access logs that clearly pointed to inconsistencies in the original investigation. She attached sworn statements and digital timestamps that contradicted the prosecution's timeline. The packet was complete, coherent, and urgent. The court responded with silence, then a single-page denial. No grounds for retrial, no acknowledgement of new evidence. She contacted private attorneys. Some replied with automated responses, others declined more formally. A few spoke with sympathy, but refused to take the case, citing conflict of interest or excessive risk. Trevor's name, when spoken aloud, changed the tone of the conversation. He was well-connected, known in the local legal circuit, respected by judges, admired in firm circles. The unspoken message was always the same. No one wanted to cross him. His reputation was a fortress, and Madison stood outside with a handful of documents no one wanted to read. She attempted to file a formal complaint with the State Bar's Ethics Board. The process was cold and procedural. After weeks of silence, the reply arrived. There was no substantial cause to investigate, no procedural violation, no action warranted. The weight of those words sat heavily in her chest. There was no outrage, no curiosity, just a shrug dressed in legal language. She realized then that justice would not come through official channels. Systems only moved when forced to. So she changed her approach. Using the skills she had refined in Portland, she applied for a temporary position in cybersecurity support through a subcontractor firm known to work with regional law offices. After background checks and NDA signatures, she was placed as a security intern within the very firm that employed her brother. The nameplate on the glass door, Winters and Blake, mocked her every morning, but she stayed silent. She dressed modestly, asked the right questions, and spoke as little as possible. No one suspected her. She was invisible in the way she had always been. Her tasks included minor firewall audits, login behavior analysis, and basic infrastructure monitoring. She had just enough access to observe without drawing attention. She worked late, claimed interest in learning, and gradually built a mirrored copy of Trevor's digital behavior. Through the firm's internal systems, she discovered cloud storage linked to Trevor's credentials. He had not stopped. The tactics he had used to frame her, recycled file paths, cross-linked credentials, modified signatures, were now appearing in other client cases. He was adjusting contracts, doctoring timestamps, fabricating correspondence, always with a clean trail and someone else to blame. The same architecture, only repurposed. But screenshots weren't enough. Cloud metadata could be disputed, discredited, or buried. To fully expose him, she needed physical access to his local drive, his office desktop, where he drafted his forgeries before exporting them to the network. That system was protected, isolated from intern-level accounts, with multi-factor authentication. Madison understood what this meant. A quiet breach wouldn't suffice. To trap him, she had to make him move. She had to create a scenario where he would reach for his tools, step into the open, and make a mistake under observation. This wouldn't be a data recovery mission, it would be a setup, and it had to be flawless. Madison moved carefully. She began by designing a false corporate identity from scratch, a digital analytics startup called Neuronsight Labs. The branding was sleek, the website minimal and professional, complete with fabricated bios of founders, fictional partnerships, and staged client testimonials. She purchased a mailing address, registered a domain, and created layers of legitimacy that could survive surface-level scrutiny. Every detail was precise, as though the company had existed for years. She reached out to a former classmate, now a consultant in corporate law, someone she trusted and who owed her a favor. Through him, a request was sent to Trevor's firm. The fictitious startup was preparing for a major funding round and considering a future IPO. They needed counsel for compliance, due diligence, and structuring. The deal looked clean, lucrative, and, most importantly, exclusive. The kind of opportunity a rising partner would want to control directly. Trevor accepted the invitation without hesitation. Flattery, even if unspoken, had always worked on him. A meeting was arranged in a shared office space downtown, rented for the occasion, dressed in the uniform of ambition. Madison remained behind the scenes, orchestrating every element. A representative, played by an actor she had hired through a local casting call, handled the pitch. During the meeting, Trevor was presented with a branded USB drive, ostensibly containing the startup's financials, past audits, and corporate structure. He was told the files were encrypted and required proprietary software to view, something only his system would be able to parse. In truth, the device carried a payload, an embedded surveillance script written to activate silently once plugged into a machine. It bypassed standard antivirus and began recording screen activity, keyboard strokes, and local file changes. All data was cached offline and set to upload to a private server whenever Trevor connected to public or unsecured Wi-Fi. For 3 weeks, Madison waited. She followed the logs discreetly, tracking activity markers and timestamps. Most were mundane: drafts, memos, red lines. But then the recordings grew darker. She watched from behind her screen as Trevor opened a directory labeled Revisions. Inside, familiar file names emerged: contracts, affidavits, compliance reports, all doctored. The footage showed him editing metadata, adjusting digital signatures, inserting dates and names that didn't exist. Then came the file she feared and expected: her own. The archive was still there. He opened it without hesitation, casually amending notes and documents tied to her case. His cursor moved over her forged confession, tweaking phrasing, copying data from another client's record. The same rhythm, the same patterns. It wasn't archival, it was ongoing. Madison sat still for a long time after the final video finished rendering. Her chest felt hollow, But her hands were steady. She had proof now. Not a theory, not a reconstruction, an act, captured in real time. He hadn't just built a frame around her past. He was still perfecting it, still using it. And now, it belonged to her. Madison compiled the evidence with methodical precision. She organized the screen recordings, encrypted the source files, and annotated every timestamp. The documents were labeled, cross-referenced, and stored in multiple locations. Once the package was complete, she reached out to a local investigative journalist known for his work on corporate fraud and institutional corruption. His name carried weight in Seattle's media circles, and his reporting had previously triggered resignations in both city government and private firms. They met in a public library conference room under the guise of a consulting request. Madison laid out the timeline, showed the recordings, and presented the architecture of the forgery network. The journalist listened in silence, eyes narrowed as the screen played back Trevor's manipulations. When the video reached the point where her own case file was reopened and tampered with, he sat back and began taking notes. What followed were 3 weeks of collaboration, during which he independently verified every claim. He contacted former clients, traced shell company registrations, and confirmed transaction paths through open-source intelligence tools. Madison remained in the background, letting the truth speak louder than her presence. The article went live on a Monday morning. Its title, "A Legal Dynasty Built on Forgery," sat in bold above a collage of court records, annotated screenshots, and encrypted document trails. It exposed not just Trevor's actions, but the complacency of the firm that shielded him. Embedded graphics tracked the flow of altered documents across state lines. Audio excerpts captured whispered conversations and redlined contracts bearing forged approval signatures. The narrative was damning, and the public reaction was immediate. Within hours, the law firm issued a statement of internal review. By the end of the week, several high-profile clients had terminated contracts, citing reputational risk. Partner meetings were canceled, and confidential memos leaked to the press confirmed internal panic. The name Winters and Blake, once spoken with respect, became a cautionary tale. Investigations followed. Financial regulators opened a preliminary inquiry. A congressional ethics panel requested access to firm billing records. Then the Department of Justice reached out to Madison. Unlike before, they listened. They asked questions. They reviewed the files. She granted them access to the entire digital vault, providing them with passwords, original hash keys, and server logs. She watched as silence gave way to motion. Officials began tracing money. Subpoenas followed. A grand jury convened. Within weeks, Trevor received a formal summons. He was to appear in court to address allegations of financial misconduct, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice. In the courtroom, Trevor remained composed. He denied every charge, claiming misinterpretation, technical error, malicious intent from unknown actors. His legal team cited deepfakes, malware, and vendettas. He smiled at the press, shook hands with colleagues, and maintained the polished mask he had always worn. But then he learned the source of the investigation. A sealed briefing was unsealed. A list of evidence was released, and at the bottom of every page, the initials MH appeared. That evening, Trevor sat alone in the parking lot of the courthouse, staring at the folder in his lap. For the first time, his face showed no calculation, no performance, only recognition. The mask had fallen, and behind it was a man watching the empire he built begin to crumble, stone by stone, lie by lie, all because the sister he underestimated had chosen not to disappear. In 2021, the courthouse in downtown Seattle buzzed with quiet tension. The trial had attracted attention far beyond the legal community. Journalists filled the benches. Former clients of the firm sat rigid in the gallery. Government observers lined the back row with notepads in hand. At the center of it all, Madison Hale sat composed, her hands resting in her lap, eyes fixed on the front of the courtroom. She had been called as the state's primary witness. The woman once branded a fraud was now the one whose testimony could dismantle everything. Across the aisle, Trevor sat behind a pane of reinforced glass. He wore a tailored suit, but his posture sagged. The mask of confidence he once wore so easily had eroded into stillness. His expression was unreadable, suspended somewhere between defiance and disbelief. The man who had spent years controlling narratives now had none to shape. His fate belonged to others. The prosecution presented its case methodically. They displayed digital logs, screen captures of login sessions originating from Trevor's devices at precise times. They showed metadata chains, code fragments, and silent recordings taken from the compromised USB. The jury listened as audio was played. Keystrokes, brief sighs, a whispered name here and there. Then came the financial data, a paper trail of redirected funds, shell company transfers, and ghost accounts tied to Trevor's personal network. Madison took the stand on the third day. She spoke clearly, neither rushed nor rehearsed. Her voice carried not accusation, but clarity. She described what had happened, how she discovered the truth, and how she traced it back to her brother. She answered questions without hesitation. Her words were supported by documents, not emotion. Her presence alone challenged every assumption the courtroom might have held about the guilty and the innocent. As the trial progressed, the weight of evidence collapsed the carefully crafted illusion Trevor had lived within. Witness after witness confirmed discrepancies. Experts authenticated the digital files. Colleagues admitted to having had suspicions, but never the courage to voice them. Madison remained calm, even as moments arose when the courtroom shifted toward her in collective realization. She wasn't there for validation, she was there for the record. On the final day, the judge delivered the sentence: 5 years in federal prison, forfeiture of assets tied to the fraudulent activity, and disbarment. There was no applause, only silence. Madison stood up and walked out without looking back. Outside, the air was damp and heavy. Reporters stood beyond the barricades, waiting for a comment she wouldn't give. Cameras clicked, but she moved past them without pause. Near the courthouse steps stood her mother, alone, her eyes red, shoulders trembling under the weight of something heavier than shame. She didn't speak. Madison didn't stop. She walked past the woman who had once believed her silence was safety. She walked past the courthouse, past the years lost, past the lies and the dismissals. She walked until the sound of the city drowned everything else out. She felt no triumph, no rage, no relief. Sometimes justice didn't arrive with a gavel or a headline. Sometimes it arrived in silence, in the absence of apology, in the space where truth no longer needed to be explained. And in that silence, Madison finally heard something that had never existed before: peace.